Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. Today, I bring you the play report of our second session of D&D 2024 Red March. This session was a good example of how situation-based prep handles the unexpected, including a near TPK that reshaped the campaign's political dynamics. Before we jump into the action, let me say that Dano couldn't make it again this week, so I played Vex as an NPC, and let me also report that Mario did decide to play today, and so he got to play Roman. So we picked up right after the party emerged from the Vault of the Embered Hand. It was nighttime, so they hunkered down in the rock formations for safety, and at that point, I had Vex address Theron. Lady Ursinia, what's the plan? He asked. Your father needs you, and his fortress does lie in these lands. I could take you there if that's what you want to do. Theron immediately said that they should go straight to him, but then the other players started weighing in with their characters' concerns. Nico was the first one to speak up. She said, Kieran and I are strangers to this land, visitors. I don't know that we're ready to be involved in a revolution. Theron responded to Nico saying, look, I'll accept that you might not be ready, but can you hear him out at least? That we can do, said Nico, and she and Kieran nodded that they'd at least listen to Lord Ursinia. Roth then interjected, asking, well, what's in it for me? And at that point said, look, my father would pay handsomely for any help that we might give against his enemies. And then Roth asked, well, even if I'm a half-orc? Roman, who's also a half-orc, stepped in and said, Theron vouching for you is enough to guarantee your safety. Roth was uncertain. He said, well, how can you be so sure? And Roman just said, I'm sure. I like that exchange because it showed how character relationships were developing, right? Roman's guarantees seemed to carry weight because of his unique position and his history with Theron. Shalith was quiet about all of this, and she went out into the night to commune with her patron. Remember, she's a warlock, about what it wanted. I had her make a wisdom check, which she failed, and because of that failure, I asked Jason to describe what he, the player, thought that the entity would be interested in, to which Jason replied that it would probably be wanting to maintain balance amongst all the powers in the area. Because Jason failed the role for Shalith, I gave him a deliberately ambiguous answer. I explained that from one perspective, the orcs had come in and leveled off all the human powers in the region with their invasion. I said, however, that in another sense, one could see the orcs' invasion as a way of amassing power around Grommet specifically. At that point, Jason said, well, if it's left up to Shalith, does she know if either one of these two groups, the orcs or the humans writ large, are especially problematic for me and my people? And I said, well, there's no monopoly on intolerance in this area. The humans would not necessarily have been kind depending on which human you were talking about, but it is true that the orcs have a more inherently supremacist ideology that they're pursuing. And not all orcs feel the same way, but that is true to this particular society of orcs. With that information, Shalith emerged from the dark, saying that she would be willing to meet with Lord Ursinia. Finally, Quirion, Mike's character, gave a cryptic reply indicating that she would float where the chaos took her or something like that. With everyone committed to at least hearing Lord Ursinia out, they decided on the 3-day journey to his keep through the Scarred Lands. This choice bypassed the competing summons that I'd prepared in case they went back to Red March. From one perspective, you could say that all of that work that I put into coming up with those multiple urgent messages went unused, and that therefore that was kind of a waste of time. But it's not, because that prep indicated things that other factions and people were doing in the campaign, and that still happened. So there are pieces in motion in the world that I get to keep track of, and because the players have not received that information yet, they can't act on it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. After some discussion, we established the travel rules. Vex would lead them out in the morning. Nico, who had the highest wisdom, would be the one making the survival rolls. And Kieran, who's the only one who actually has the proficiency for survival, would assist Nico, giving her advantage. Consequently, Nico made every survival roll for the session without any failures, and that ultimately was a good thing. But success on navigation doesn't mean safety in the scarred lands. Indeed, the first encounter nearly ended the game before it really began. Since they were embarking on essentially a hex crawl at this point, I started using my random tables. And on the very first day, I rolled a weather event and got a magical storm. I suggested that this might be connected to Shalith's patron communion, though it's primarily just something that happens in the Scarred Lands. Then I rolled for an encounter, and I rolled the nastiest thing that was on the list, a chimera. And then I rolled to see how close it was, and it was at close range. And then I rolled to see when it happened, and it was during camp breaking, or just after the characters broke camp. It was like the perfect storm of bad rolls. So I described that they had broke down camp, that they were emerging from the rock formation as harsh winds and purple lightning arced through the sky. One bolt struck the cliff top above them with a sound so loud their hearts skipped a beat, and where the bolt struck, a chimera appeared, roaring menacingly. I had the party roll initiative, and the party won. The casters used their actions to cast mage armor, and others held their actions until the chimera acted. The chimera then launched itself at them, and the first few moves were really cool. Kieran took his held action, moved towards it, jumping off of boulders, and then struck it in midair for solid damage with 2 blows before backflipping off the chimera and landing in a combat position. Roth fired an arrow at the chimera and struck it for a nice solid hit. And Theron cast, I think it was Guiding Bolt, which struck the chimera and did significant damage to it, almost halting it in midair for a moment. The chimera was down by about half of its hit points already, which was a fun and impressive start. However, then it was its turn to go, and disaster struck. The chimera dove down at Chiron, headbutted him, and then bit him with the lion head. Chiron died instantly from massive damage. Then it turned its attention to the other PCs who were sort of bunched together because they were in the rock formation, and it breathed fire on them and killed them all. Now, I was rolling this damage by just clicking on the attacks on the VTT, and as the damage was rolling, I'm seeing the number of dice that are being rolled, and I said, hold on guys, I made a mistake here. Yes, you guys are fighting a chimera, but I didn't mean it to be this kind of encounter. I just simply forgot to check the stat blocks that had been generated by the AI and placed on that random encounter table. I didn't have time to look them over. I saw that there was like chimera on there, but I haven't used a chimera in D&D for a very long time, and I just didn't remember how overwhelming they were. So I felt like I needed to turn this into a junior version of the chimera. I adjusted the attacks to something that I felt was more reasonable. I mean, it was still kind of pitching above their level, but it wasn't so overwhelming that there just would be no chance. And then after having done, I said, hey guys, hold on a second. We're going to backtrack to the beginning of the round here, and I'm going to re-roll the damage. So I re-rolled the damage for Chiron. He still went down, but he didn't die from massive damage. Then I re-rolled the breath weapon, and unfortunately, I rolled nearly maximum damage. It was 3d8 plus 2, and I rolled 2 8s and a 7 plus 2. Not as overwhelmingly devastating as a 7d8 plus 4, but still devastating. It took everybody down except Quirion. So next round, Quirion went first, and fortunately for everybody, she launched a chromatic orb that froze the chimera to death. And then she went to try to stabilize the party. So she tried on Theron first round, and she succeeded. She tried on Roth, and she succeeded. She tried on Chiron, but failed. Fortunately, humans have that inspiration point that they get for just being human. He was able to use it to nullify the 1 he rolled on a death save, and then made the subsequent death saves after that, and he brought himself to a point of stability. Unfortunately, Roman and Shalith both took massive damage and died permanently. And here's the thing. This event reshuffled the campaign's political dynamics, right? Roman's death means that there's no more family connection to Tharzug's ceremony. It means that it changes the nature of the tension within the party about what to do when they confront some of the situations that they're probably going to be confronting at some point in the future of this game. Now, some people might look at this and say, oh no, you just ruined the story, or you let the dice ruin the story. You should have found a way of keeping Roman alive so that the story would survive. But that's the thing. I run games to see what happens, and this is what happened. Now, story is created by what happened. So later, when the session is over, we'll sit down and talk about the things that happened. And in that sense, at that point, there is a story that will be related about what happened. But my job as game master is not to protect the story against what happens in play. The type of gaming that I like to do involves play, and then we look back and say, whoa, what a story did that play create? Well, after that event, the party had to spend a day recovering and temporarily burying their dead outside the vault. And then the next day, they continued through the Scarred Lands. On their first day of actual travel, we rolled on all the various tables, and this turned out to be more atmospheric and less destructive. Party spent most of the day walking through a misty terrain, and little by little, this misty terrain started to manifest ghostly figures. First, orcs, ready for battle and running in to attack, then humans as the orc line met the human line, and then vicious battling between the two before another ghostly image of a giant creature with a beak and clawed hands came in, wiping out both orc and human indiscriminately. And when it came in and attacked in that ghostly scene, it kind of wiped the mist away and everything just kind of like diffused into the air. They then camped out for the night out in the Scarred Lands, and that's where they met Jason's replacement character, Sargus. Sargus is a fighter and a criminal who escaped into the Scarred Lands to avoid trouble, and he sees opportunity traveling with a party for safety and profit, and he's also awkwardly interested in some of the women that he finds attractive in the party. He wields a sword, carries a whip, and is just a bit of a rogue. We then proceeded to day 2. Again, we rolled on those random encounter tables and more atmosphere. The characters spent most of the second day walking through a war-torn landscape where ashen rain kind of came down on them for much of the day before they hit a cliff that went down at like a 35-degree angle to a kind of a flat plain. The characters descended into this plain and saw a black rock temple some distance away from them. The temple emanated a booming voice in Infernal and an echo from the past of a rallying speech for some massive army. The whole situation was weird because only characters who descended into the crater basin and touched their feet on the ground could hear the voices. And the characters seemed to be really scared, hiding, running, casting mage armor spells, trying to figure out how to avoid whatever was coming. And when I described that the speech ended and they heard a rumble of an army advancing towards them, they were bracing themselves for something horrible to happen. And then the army just passed right through and over them as an auditory effect, which left them shaken, but none the worse for wear. Nico and Quirion then discussed what kind of magic might be causing this phenomena, and when they got to the center of this basin area and got closer to that Black Rock Temple, they mused on the chaos nature of the magic in this region. There, they also met Mario's new character, Kashuri, who's a human fighter and a young archer whose nomad tribe was wiped out by Gorza's orcs, and now he's seeking revenge. Day 3, again, we rolled on the random encounter tables, and day 3 saw them approaching this hilly terrain being characterized by rocks floating in the air. As they entered this reality-warped landscape, they encountered some of Gorza's orcs who were hiding in the hills nearby and had to fight them. Unlike the Chimera, the characters were able to make quick work of this patrol, and that's where we decided to pause for the night. So as I reflect on what we did last night, I am really pleased with the way that the random encounter tables generated by Claude worked out. I mean, in the sense that they generated some pretty evocative things, I thought. The ghostly battlefield, the infernal temple with the phantom armies, the floating stones, all of that charged my imagination. Also, the table brought in one of the factions, right? The enemy patrols that are Gorza's people. That was a nice touch. Essentially, the tables did what I needed them to do. One exception, of course, is that Chimera encounter. I mean, I'm not against putting an overpowered creature, an unbalanced creature, in a low-level adventure, but I'd want to make sure that I did it in a way that was a little more subtle than that. And it's really on me. I should have made time to review those stat blocks before I just embraced what Claude threw at me. Anyway, I'm grateful to my players for being cool with the recalibration that I did mid-game and for accepting the still harsh outcomes that occurred even with that recalibration. So it's likely that we'll be playing this again soon. The characters will complete the third day of travel without further incident. And so next time we play, the characters should be meeting Lord Ursinia, and we'll see how that whole situation works out. So come on back if you're interested in seeing what happens next. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in. And as always, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.